Hey, everybody, we have a really wonderful update on FLFE. They have some exciting data coming out now because they decided to go into partnership with Dr. Gary Schwartz. Some of you have seen my previous interview with Dr. Gary Schwartz, who has been with the University of Arizona, Tucson, studying fields of consciousness of all kinds and validating their existence, which has given a lot of credibility to the world of psychical phenomena, all the way to this technology now known as FLFE, Focused Life Force Energy. And so we're going to be talking with Jeff and Gary today about some wonderful new data that has come out, particularly on EMF mitigation and its effects on the people that are using FLFE. It's kind of long awaited. Also, its effect on crops and growing food, healthy organic food. So let's go to Jeff and Gary. Hi, Gary. It's good to see you after all of these years. It's been about a decade. And I have to say, last time I saw you in the flesh, I believe, was when we were at the sushi counter at Harvey Nichols in London. And we had a conveyor belt going by with sushi on it.
That's right. You have a good memory.
Yeah, it was one of those random things. We were both in London, and I had no idea you could get sushi off of a conveyor belt. In the times of COVID, it would seem a little unsanitary now in hindsight. Anyway, it's good to see you, and we're going to find out how you became involved with FLFE. Jeff, it's so good to see you again. And why don't we start with how you came into collaboration with one another? Gary's pretty high profile, and I know that, Gary, you've worked in the areas of consciousness and energy and being able to measure such for the better part of your career, academic career. So that's brought a lot of legitimacy to these fields. So now we're looking at bringing data to Fluffy. So why don't we go to you, Jeff, first and find out how you and Gary came together, you and Clayton, FLFE and Gary came together.
So we had a subscriber, Lewis Humphreys, just pop in and say, hey, I'm a subscriber. I'm having this extraordinary experience. What can I do to help? And he had this experience with his pool. So every FLFE's property has a vortex, and his vortex happened to be in his pool. So every time he went in his pool, he would get these incredible experiences. So Lewis joined the research team and became, the head of our research team. And he is in the University of Arizona at the called Tech Launch. It's part of the licensing and helping new companies with new ideas and new patents, perhaps research through the university grow. And so he's been a great influence on the research team. But then I'll pass it to you, Gary. He had met you or already knew you.
Yes, I've known Lewis because of the work. Some of the work that I do involves technology transfer, and technology transfer is the office that he works in. And he is one of the few technology transfer people in the country, I think at any university, whose interests are broad enough to address extraordinary kinds of technologies. And the research that we do, for example, on what's called the soul phone, on developing spirit communication technology, certainly falls within that arena. And he, when we were working on that particular area, he said, I have met this group of people who are doing extraordinary work. And they are doing work that's profoundly important for humanity, and they're evidence-based. They really care about bridging science and spirituality. In fact, they even see business as a spiritual practice, a spiritual path. And so they said, maybe you could help them in their quest for discovering what's real about what they're doing. And so after a bit of time, I was introduced to Clayton and Jeff, some of the other members, and I became, I would have to say, literally in awe of their commitment to truth-seeking and following the evidence where it leads. And that's how it started.
I couldn't agree more with that. I've known them for quite a while now, and I have the exact same observation. In fact, you were doing a larger event, and you happened to make this comment, and I wrote it down because it's so true. You said, you were talking to the members of the group of FLFE, and you said you're a very unusual group of people on a very exceptional mission. And I think I have mentioned this before, that I don't think this is really from here. It's almost like it's a technology that's come through from another time, another dimension, and is here now for us to use, and requires the utmost responsibility and care. And certainly everyone I've dealt with at Fluffy has exemplified that. So I know that sounds like that's your point of view on it too. If you want to explain a little more what happened once you became familiar with the technology a bit.
Yes, I am. Whenever I approach a new area, which is particularly when it's controversial, I take my writing partner once described me as being an orthodox agnostic. And what that means is, in plain English, is whether the question is there gravity or is there God? Doesn't matter what the question is. My response is, I don't know. Could be yes, could be no. Show me the data. I'm open. Mm-hmm. And the question was, as I came to learn about FLFE, and I like the term fluffy, by the way.
I do too.
We've resisted over the years, but we can now.
But there were a couple of issues here. Number one, was what they were doing, was it possible to actually collect data that could confirm or disconfirm the claims that they were making and reporting? That was question number one. And question number two was, did the people who were in the organization, who co-founded the organization, did they really care about knowing? And not just knowing because so they could develop a quote business, but more importantly, knowing with the goal of enhancing understanding, enhancing consciousness, enhancing evolution, and so on. And I became convinced, and it probably was over a year of meetings, that they were a truly exceptional group of people, and therefore it was worth doing the work to see whether there was a real phenomena here or not.
Right. Wonderful. I'm so glad you made that decision. So what you brought to the table is you understand from an academic perspective in particular how to create the correct kind of protocols, surveys, et cetera, to make legitimate research out of, in this case, what we're going to be talking about is out of user experience, and rather than just having a collection of anecdotal stories. So let's talk about what that means, and without getting too technical, because we want to get onto the stats, what that means. How do you create a survey that reflects science based on user experience?
Well, it begins with, first of all, the fact that FLFE was already getting information because people provide tremendous testimonials. Mm-hmm. I mean, people are, as you know, people are constantly sharing their experiences. And because they had a wealth of this experience, and because they keep records, they keep data, it's so wonderful, it was possible to look and see what were the most frequent reports that tended to generalize across people. And the team, and particularly Jeff and Maria, they were able to put together a list of what they thought were the most frequent, empirically based on spontaneous testimonials.
Right.
And then from that, we call this, quote, the low-hanging fruit. And by the way, if there isn't fruit and it's not low-hanging, why would one want the service in the first place? So the low-hanging fruit is not a criticism or taking the easy route. It's getting at the core, the essence of what you're looking for. And so what we then did was we structured a set of formal questions and rating scales that could easily be understood by any person, by a lay person, an academic or whatever, so that people could literally score the extent to which they were experiencing different sets of items. And the question was, if you gave this now to a large group of people, could you create an instrument that would have internal validity and reliability, and could quantify the degree to which people were actually reporting these kinds of experiences? And we included in that certain critical questions. Probably the most important one from my vantage point was a question about expectancy. To what extent as I look back over their experience, were the effects that they experienced less than, equal to, or greater than what they expected when they came into the service?
Yes. Okay. So now we need to get down to some of that, because what was interesting and an area that really gets people excited is the EMF mitigation. And I've already told you this privately, I think, Jeff, but I feel like such a dope in that I've had FLFE on my phone and on my home. We're going to talk about plants in a moment and what you've done with some experiments there. But the EMF mitigation part, I never really thought when I travel a lot, I'm in hotel rooms a lot, to put my phone next to my bed on the bedstand and nightstand. And I started doing that accidentally at a hotel because there was nowhere else to plug it, except the bathroom. And I thought, well, it was a great night's sleep. I didn't seem to be wiggling around much. And same thing the next night. And I thought, what's different here? And I thought, because usually it was bothersome, I thought, wait a minute, I've got FLFE on right next to my head here. And so I started experimenting at other hotels since I've been traveling. Now I can actually go back to one of my favorite hotels and stay there. I stopped because there was so much EMF noise. I was having felt energy kind of running up and down my legs and stuff. And so anyway, I was blown away thinking I had that device the whole time with me on my cell phone and wasn't using it. So now let's get into your EMF experiment with the larger basis of people, not my little anecdote.
Sleep is one of the things that's top of the list.
Yes.
So Gary did some work and found a study. And then we've now had two studies. One was a kind of before and after survey with the EMF, this kind of self-identified EMF sensitives within the FLFE community who heard us talking about, this coming EMF mitigation. And they said, put me in a beta group. So we did a before and after with them. And then we just finished this EMF sensitive studies with a researcher from the University of Pennsylvania. But man, sleep is at the top of those lists, consistently. So I understand what you were going through there, going to a strange hotel. In the
world. Now I can kind of sleep pretty well wherever I am, where EMF has been a factor. And that is shockingly most places. Certainly if you're staying in high density housing, apartment buildings, even neighborhoods with closely spaced housing and so forth. It's kind of shocking how much our bodies are up against right now.
And I think it's related to restlessness, anxiety, feeling of stress that people also, say there are symptoms that they feel and things that we looked at. And those may be part of why it's hard to sleep, but those are kind of also symptoms that people who are especially sensitive to EMFs, and it may be at some scale, many people may be feeling this and not realize it.
Yeah.
Concentration, brain fog, kind of tinnitus, kind of ear ringing type sounds, tightness in the face, irritation, headaches. Those are some of the things that people experience, and we looked at in the research.
Yeah, and you have it by scale, and you have some graphics. We're going to throw a couple graphics in as we go here. So, Gary, let's look at something else that had happened simultaneously. So you're getting this survey information back from people who are telling you how they're now experiencing their reality in terms of sleep and all these factors that Jeff just mentioned. But you also came across another study out of the Netherlands, which was very interesting in its implications to this study. So let's just set up in the bones of what was that other study showing?
The other study was very important because they were approaching this in terms of mitigation by removing technology that you're exposed to. And of course, if you are sensitive, for example, to cell phones, or particular phones, one way to do this is to eliminate that phone. If you've got problems with Wi-Fi, turn it off, certainly at night. There are a bunch of techniques that one can use to attempt to either eliminate or reduce some of this technology or protect yourself from it. And when they went through their the reports that people had when they did these techniques, and they looked and they rank ordered the symptoms that were most likely to change when people experienced positive benefits. It was the same profile of symptoms
Sleep
that
right
FLFE was
top.
observing, and sleep was right at the top. Okay. It was quite, and fatigue. And it was when you see that kind of replication across country, across purpose. But you see here, what FLFE is doing is mitigation by changing the environment and the people's ability to live in that environment,
Yes.
which benefits us in the 21st century.
Oh, absolutely. So rather than having to turn everything off, or get rid of it, or put it in the garage or in the car or something, everything can stay as is. And FLFE is showing that it is mitigating these things, and that's why I thought that other study was so fascinating to hold up against it, because it gave you some empirical evidence that the exact same effects were happening. So it's the number one was sleep. Right. And then there's also concentration. And tell us another of the top, say 4 or 5 that are very significantly impacted, as we'll see on this graph in a moment.
Well, fatigue was next, after sleep, which kind of goes together. If you don't get enough sleep, you're probably fatigued. But there was
concentration.
In the Netherlands study, it was restlessness, what they called restlessness, which we didn't use exactly the same words, in our studies, but feeling of anxiety or stress, could fall into that as well. And then they had the tinnitus and the headache and the tight band was
pain in the head area. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I think that covered the top ones.
And that was pretty much the same in your study. So we see here, we're looking at 62% reduction in terms of the sense of stress in the study. 60% said they had more energy. 57% said they had better sleep, right?
Correct. I mean, we should qualify, because especially with someone like myself who does research at various levels, that the research that FLFE is doing, and most of these other groups are doing, is what's called phase 1 research, which means that you're trying to collect enough data to see, is something happening? And once you have enough data to know that something is happening, that's when you want to embark on what are called phase 2 studies, where you do the double blinding and all the other controls that you want to do to try to understand how something is working and what the mechanisms are.
I hope you're enjoying this video, because if you are, there are dozens more like it on my site, all supported by people like you. So if you'd like to keep this work rolling in and join our community, just click on the Patreon button at reginameredith.com. That also gives you access to insider commentary, my live book club, and other live events with special guests. So join in. Thanks.
This is specifically aimed at looking at the effects of EMFs. And certainly one of the things that is encroaching upon the world, certainly in dense populations and large cities around the world, is 5G. Now, we did a show before on 5G, and just some of the original visuals on that by way of Konstantin Karakov's work. And so we were showing that it was kind of flattening the line of that spiky frequency with 5G. That was 2 or 3 years ago. 5G is much more prevalent now. What do you, both of you, have to say about 5G, what you're seeing, and how FLFE seems to be handling it from what you know?
Jeff, what would you say?
Well, again, looking at the studies, trying to find those good studies that really are looking at the effects with large numbers of people. We're not doing those yet, besides what we're presenting here today. Mm-hmm. But what we hear from our customers is there was a lot of concern as it started to roll out. Was FLFE really, was the environment really going to mitigate these new influences? And we have found that it has. We have some very, very sensitive people who are on the service. And, we've got testimonials from them saying basically, I can't go out without my phone.
Mhm.
And when I forget my phone and I go under a 5G tower, I feel sick and I'm dizzy and I'm disoriented.
Mhm.
When I take the FLFE phone with me, I feel okay. Now, if I stay, what these testimonials say is when I stay under that tower for an extended period, then I'd start to not feel good.
Right.
So it doesn't seem, from that, I'm kind of extrapolating, it's not 100% mitigation. There's some, there's a bubble that's assisting and there's mitigation, but it may not be 100%.
Okay. And so are you going to be doing any more kind of direct studies on 5G in the future? Or is that going to continue to be part of the EMF bundle and user experience study?
Well, we plan to do an extension or a replication of the study using the Melissa Waterman's equipment, the discharge.
Yeah, what's it called, Gary? What is the name of?
It's a gas discharge visualization system, GDV.
GDV,
correct.
That's the wonderful scientist, Russian man, Konstantin Karakov's original technology. Just beautiful fellow. His work complements what you're doing so well. So anyway, yeah, she measured it. It was pretty stunning. And we can, in fact, take a look at that little graph. And what we're seeing there is the red frequencies were, as I recall, the red frequencies were 5G. And then the blue came in and you could see how it even knocked everything down from being previously very spiky. So that was pretty significant just when I saw that the first time. It was encouraging. So, okay, now, we've just been talking about EMFs, and now I want to go to your studies with plants and what FLFE has been doing with plants and crops. And you did a significant study out of Saskatchewan, as I recall. And I think it's also significant that it was during a drought, not the most advantageous conditions. Nonetheless, yes, studies are studies, and we have to see what you came up with. So tell us about the intention of that, because we teased it last time I talked to you. What actually happened? How many acres were involved in the control and FLFE, and what ended up coming out of that?
Well, yes, it was a drought year. I checked with the farmer; they were not irrigating that field.
That's what I was wondering. It's a little different in Canada.
In the North American Drought Monitor, if you go to that, you can see where the farm was located in 2021, and it was in moderate drought, what they called moderate drought. So it wasn't severe drought, but it was still what they considered a drought. The farmer that we worked with is an FLFE subscriber. Again, we see things seem to come from the subscribers. He wanted to put the service on his entire property. We said, well, hey, let's do a study. And what we're looking for, and I'll put a plug in, we'd love to find more farmers, organic farmers. We're only working with organic farmers who would like to do a study with us. And what was really significant about this farm was they had the equipment that could tell us by acre what the yield was of the plant. So we had relatively large control area and then an FLFE area that was smaller that we broke it down into sections so that we could get enough data for Gary to do a statistical analysis. And we were able to get a high level of, I'll let you talk about the statistics of it, Gary, but we were able to get an average of over 22% increase in yield in a moderate drought year.
And that was just one of the stats, because you also had increase in the foliage and the leafing and the depth of the roots, which was statistically fabulous. So Gary, let's talk about that.
Well, these are actually multiple studies. What's important, for example, about both the leaf study, the root study, and this wicker farm study is that they were all done blind. so that the farmer didn't know which part of the field, if I remember correctly. And of course, in the plant studies, people who were running the experiments didn't know which particular housing of the plants was receiving the FLFE or not.
Right.
Which is essential if you're going to draw conclusions. And still under those, more rigid, what I call phase 2 kinds of experiments, clear statistical significance in these studies emerged. And, one of the things we don't typically attribute placebo effects to plants. Now, granted, plants may very well, of course, have consciousness, and so they may pick out some things from us in a paranormal sense, and of course, our consciousness. But the point is that it tells us this is not just a simple, quote, experimenter effect. It's not just sort of a belief. The same issue even goes back to the customer experience survey, because what we found was that 2/3 of this large sample, over 300 people, 2/3 of these people reported that the effects of FLFE were greater than they expected. Mm-hmm. And they simultaneously reported the greatest degree of benefits. So again, it's not a simple expectancy effect. It's not a simple placebo effect. There's something real going on here, and that's to be celebrated.
Absolutely. And 22% in terms of crop yield is very significant. If every farm, and no less organically in a drought year. I love that. Now, I have a question to ask you. I have an unbearable problem with crabgrass the last few years. Is Fluffy doing that? Is it possible? I have never seen such wicked amount and depth of roots. And I know they have the taproot that goes to hell, they say, but there's nothing we can do to get rid of the amount of crabgrass.
Wait, I have to ask a question. Is it your sense that there's more or less water? Are there any other variables that you're aware of that might explain this?
No, okay. And it's the last few years, it's just been, do you know what
the definition of a weed is? What? The definition of a weed is a plant that you don't like. That's what the definition of a weed is. But plants are plants. And so I would hope, all things being equal, that Fluffy would be able to nourish almost anything that was natural and that could, be part of the ecology. The fact that we don't like it in our gardens, I think that's, less.
It didn't occur to me till just now that might be why it's so darn healthy. But, in some places in the world, it's called Bermuda grass and people just shave it off and call it a yard. But when it's choking out all your other pretty plants, anyway,
of course,
it occurred to me that might be why it's so hardy. But let's talk about what people kind of anecdotally are experiencing in terms of their gardens, in terms of, I know flower freshness. A lot of people comment on the fact that even their cut flowers seem to last quite a long time. So what are you hearing about plants on the domestic front?
Well, the plant experiments are done with standard FLFE, which is what we see from customers, but also we have an experimental enhanced FLFE for plants, which was used in the study, in several of the studies that we have. What customers are saying is there a noticeable difference before and after of plant growth. And for me, I see our orchids. I used to have just, I guess, I don't know, a brown thumb in regards to orchids. I would buy an orchid, it would last some amount of time, and then it would just be a stick, right, for the foreseeable future. And now we have a whole wall of orchids that continually bloom. I mean, they lose their bloom, a new one comes. I mean, literally, there's just maybe a week in between or two. And my neighbor who walks his dog up and down the street has got a south-facing window full of orchids like ours. And he keeps saying, why aren't my orchids blooming like your orchids? We're both watering the same amount. We told him just water, 1 cup, or just, we have a little thimbleful that we do each plant each week. Mm-hmm. He's doing the exact same thing, and he's not getting the orchid
Wow.
blooms that we are.
Cool. So you can capitalize on those Trader Joe's inexpensive orchids and create a whole wall of them, I guess. That's very cool. Hey, thanks for sharing that. Because I know all of it, anybody listening, is we're all kind of looking at how can this enhance our personal lives. I mean, I'm interested in the data and studies, but in the end, we all want to enhance our personal lives. And one of the areas that you're just starting to go into and play with a little bit is structured water with FLFE. And I don't know if you're prepared to talk about that just yet.
Yeah, we're doing a beta group of about 36 people now with what we either call it super water or magic water, or we're not sure what to call it yet, but where we have a photograph of the water bottle, and we are bringing that water to 850 on the Hawkins map, which is very extraordinarily high. Because that, when we did our kinesiology testing, that was the optimal consciousness level for food and water for it to absorb. And so we have a group that are trying this and taking notes, and we'll be comparing those notes shortly. And then we'll move into some hopefully lab research in Gary's lab on water. What I notice is I use kinesiology to measure my hydration. And I was having a really difficult time on a parallel scale to 1,000, where 1,000 is the most appropriate hydration for me, getting above 400. I mean, I was drinking literally 48 ounces of water 4 times a day.
Oh my gosh.
And I couldn't get it above 400. So we put this program on, and I'm at like 2 48-ounce bottles, and I'm at 900 plus almost all the time.
Wow.
On that same scale. So I didn't expect that to happen. But man, I feel great. I feel so much just nutrified. You know, what once I thought was hunger and I would be snacking all the time, when my thirst is satisfied, that wasn't occurring.
That's interesting, because that is what I've heard from other people in the field of medicine, is oftentimes when we're thinking we're hungry, we're actually thirsty. We're just not, somehow our cells aren't absorbing. So you're having that experience where you're becoming satiated.
And we'd love to get what's the scientific, lab results that you could get there. Is the pH changing? Is the viscosity somehow changing? What does that look like? And it's part of, how does a high consciousness field affect us in our lives? So this water bottle program is coming to FLFE in the next couple of months. So, but we also, water in the normal fluffy field is higher consciousness than the normal, because everything in the fluffy field is higher than the normal environment. So people do notice that when they start on FLFE that the water is different. But now we're taking it to the next level with this water bottle program.
That's fabulous. Good. I'm looking forward to that. Gary, this is something I think everybody's wondered since we first started talking about fluffy several years ago now. And that is, people want to know what it looks like. And my understanding is that you're beginning to play with the notion of using biophotonics to be able to capture a visual representation of what FLFE looks like. What is that about? How is that going to work?
Well, it's a really good question, because from a scientific point of view, you have to ask the question, are you looking for structure in just a room or an environment? Or are you looking for fluffy when it is manifest as it interacts with something that is receiving it? And that question about whether it's just, quote, in the air, or whether you need it to be received and then process the energy in that context, is something that we will be looking at when we start doing the biophoton imaging this fall. But Jeff has some specific predictions about what he will see.
Well, we know that from intuitives that can see the more subtle energies, that there is this vortex shape that is where the FLFE energy comes in. So I would love to see that in a biophoton. That my prediction would be that there would be some photonic activity in that boundary level where that subtle energy is kind of coming into the space. But what I would really love to see is the level of consciousness of, say, an object. Say if you had a crystal or a plant or something in the box, in the dark box where the biophoton experiment's taking place, and you step up the energy, you go, you get 500 on Hawkins map, 600, 700, 800, 900. And we know that's logarithmic, that I would look for a logarithmic increase in the photon activity, to match that.
Interesting.
One of my go ahead.
I was just going to say, that could lead you to an instrument that could read the level of consciousness of an environment.
Oh, yeah. That would be exciting. What are you going to say about that, Gary?
Well, what I was going to say is that one of the things that I find so fascinating and inspiring about FLFEs is that not only is it, first of all, driven by customer experiences and what people experience first, which they then use to examine and pursue what the effects are. But secondly, is that the predictions with regard to, for example, biophotons or water or plants and so forth, they're all testable.
Mm-hmm.
They're all, you can bring them into under controlled circumstance and get an answer one way or another.
Yeah.
And the beautiful thing is that the FLFE senior people, as well as my sense of the company as a whole, is everybody's enthusiastic for the quest to discover what's real.
Absolutely. Intellectual honesty going on there. Okay, I have a question now for myself and anybody else listening. We're talking about biophotonics. We were talking about Konstantin's device, the GDV, a little bit ago. What is the difference in what they're measuring so we can look forward to what this all, means?
Well, the GDV is a device which is like, quote, Curlian photography.
Mm-hmm.
And that technology means that you are imposing a high voltage, high frequency, low current to a source, be it a leaf of a plant or to water. I mean, it's going through the system. And then you're looking for the glowing that is produced by the interaction of the energy with the object that is being recorded. And so it's an active intervention process, but because it has very sophisticated measurements that Konstantin and his team have developed, including their measures of what they call entropy or variability, which is the graph that you were referring to, you can look at a lot of parameters, but those are responses to things that are in the environment, which is what I was talking about, or that, response to plants or whatever. Biophoton imaging is of course light that's being emitted. They're biophotons, meaning they're biological photons, but the equipment is just general purpose, super sensitive, low light CCD cameras, which are looking in a pitch black environment. Our camera is cooled to minus 77 degrees centigrade when it's doing its recordings. So you're measuring any photons in the environment. And if those photons are being emitted by a biological source, they're called biophotons.
And that's how you are going to be able to get a picture of what Fluffy looks like?
That is the hypothesis.
That's exciting. I can't wait to see what it looks like. I want to see its geometrical structure because of the levels of consciousness involved. I'm guessing it's going to be quite lovely, but we're all supposing right now. That experiment has yet to be conducted. So before we sign off here, of all of the work you're doing right now, what is really what are you most excited about continuing the development of, and anything else we haven't covered that's new that is coming up down the pike?
Yeah, I think for me, it's about our evolution. So that's our mission, is supporting the evolution of consciousness. So what we're working on are some ways to help that besides the environment. So the pristine environment, the mitigating MBMFs, all those things can help us to kind of relax into who we are. And we're working on a meditation program that would be you push the button and you start your meditation, and it has a certain length of time, and then we would bring in energies that would be specifically helpful for meditation and for our evolution. So for me, that's where I get the most excited is how can we continue to evolve as a race and individually.
So a person will be able to hit a button, as you say, on your program in the computer, and you'll be able to take, say, a given space and bring it to a certain frequency level, or is there something else embedded in that?
Well, it's similar to the boosts that we have currently on the service. We have a 600 boost, and now we have an 850 boost. I know you're familiar with the 850 field, which Beautiful. Is, unusually high level of consciousness. So we have this sort of optimizing and aligning boost at 850. So this meditation will be like that. It's a boost that when you push the button, we're able to, for that particular property, to raise the level of consciousness. And yes, we would be adding other things. So we'd look at what we're looking at. Okay, where are meditations really fruitful for evolution? Tibetan monasteries, places in India, where there's practices, there's energy fields there or consciousness fields there that support people to evolve. And that's what we'll be bringing into that environment, those consciousness fields.
I have used the 850 boost, and it's impossible to even really have negative thoughts when you're sitting in it. It's also kind of hard to do a lot of mundane tasks while you're in it. I found that you really need to set aside a little bit of quiet and time to just move into that field and use it appropriately, which is in a much more high consciousness way. It's beautiful. But what you're talking about here, which is interesting, you just mentioned monasteries a moment ago. So what this has the potential to do is for people who go out into the world, who go to monasteries, who go to sacred sites around the world because they want to experience the energy. What I'm hearing you say is you should be able to create that field in your own home, right?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, with the FLFE technology, we're able to port or move those consciousness fields or connect with those consciousness fields around the world and bring them into the home. And we already do that with FLFE at this current level. But as you said, we have to work and, function in the world. So we can't be at that super high level all the time. Yeah, maybe eventually we'll get there where we could just turn it up and leave it up.
Not yet.
Not yet, for sure.
It's so beautiful if you have some time every day dedicated to it. It's lovely. Thank you for that. So you're really jazzed about the expansion of consciousness that's possible through using the technology. So I'll ask you, Gary, what has you most jazzed right now?
What has me most jazzed, it's very hard to pick one thing. It's sort of like you're in this garden of opportunity, of all these beautiful questions, be they micro questions or macro questions. And the amazing thing is that FLFE is the kind of environment where you can address these different levels of questions. I think that I too am if you really pushed me on this, I would say it's really to get at the heart of the deepest theoretical question, which is how is it possible for this technology with these intentions to have an effect in the physical world? Absolutely. And it's the bridging of human intention and higher intention that for me is now we're seeing a window of opportunity to start approaching that. And therefore the bridge, the relationship between the physical and the greater reality is going to become more and more open to us.
That's the $64,000 question. How does this all actually fit and work together? It does. And the proofs of that are just, you have your work cut out for you, but it's a beautiful journey. So anyway, both of you, and unless you have final thoughts, we'll say goodbye for now. I'm very excited about what you're finding out with the EMF net mitigation. Also with plants, and I have to rethink my relationship to crabgrass. Okay, but beyond that, and then the meditation spaces and water. So I think we've covered a fair amount of ground. Any final thoughts before we say goodbye?
Thank you for having us. It's great to be with you, Regina.
That's always
quite a journey.
Always.
And ditto from me.
It's good to see you too again, Gary, after all this time. So we'll catch up when you have more data in next time, because we all like to crunch a little data. And thank you again just for everything you do and for bringing this incredible technology and experience to all of us. I know most of the people I know have it now, and we wouldn't live without it again. So anyway, thank you so much. For those of you who are not already on the FLFE program, I know many of you are, but if you want to check out what's going on or play with those booths and such, you can go to FLFE.net. Now, if you don't know anything about this, if you haven't experienced it, and if you are EMF sensitive, anyone EMF sensitive, please reach out through the site to them and become part of their next study. They're going to continue these studies, and the studies are getting larger and larger, and they need people who are EMF sensitive. You don't have to pay for that. That's free. So you'll be able to be on the program while you're part of that study. So again, FLFE.net. Until next time, thank you for joining us here on reginameredith.com. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And you might also want to consider joining Patreon, which allows me to keep all of this content free and available to everyone. And if you're looking for like-minded souls, you might also enjoy my online community called Our Neighborhood. Links to join are in the description.